how to knit your basic increases for the loom, including knitting into the same loop and yarn overs.
For today's tutorial, you will need a knitting loom. Today we will be using the Kiss regular gauge knitting loom with one spacer in between the pins and the pegs, your knitting tools, and a ball of yarn. Today we will be using Manos Maxima worsted weight 100% merino wool in the color Chamomille. A yarn over is a simple increase that allows you to add a stitch into your knitting, making it larger. In this example, I want to yarn over on the second peg here. So I want to add a stitch in between this second peg and this third peg. So what we're going to do is we're going to slip this stitch on the edge over one peg, and same with the second stitch. Make sure when you slip your stitches that you're always bringing the stitch behind the pins if you're working on a Kiss loom. Then I'm going to just knit over to where I want to add my stitch with the yarn over. And basically this is really easy. You're just going to wrap around your peg just as if you were going to knit, but you're just going to leave it there on that empty peg and continue on with your pattern. And you can kind of see here, this will give you an extra stitch coming out of this stitch here and this stitch here, making your stitching a little bit wider. There are two ways to knit into a stitch in traditional knitting. Your pattern will either tell you to knit through the front, then through the back of a stitch, or it will tell you to alternate between purl and knit stitches. In this video, we will demonstrate both. Knitting into a stitch can be slightly more complicated than the easier yarn over, but it's still an easy technique to get a hold of. To knit through the front and back of a stitch, first you'll need to slip your stitches prior to that place in your pattern over one to make room for the new stitch. In this example, we've slipped these two stitches prior to the stitch we want to knit through the back and front of over one so that we have an empty peg here for our new stitch. I find it easier to also slip the stitch that we're going to be working with over one peg so that I can work my stitches this way. It feels more natural to me than working backwards. Then we're going to take our working yarn that's coming out of this stitch here. We're going to bring it around front and we're going to wrap the peg just like normal as if we were going to knit. Then we're going to scoop up this bottom loop here and we're going to slide it off just like as if we were knitting, but instead of dropping this stitch, we're actually going to transfer it and slip it onto the empty peg. So now we have a stitch on both pegs. Now we need to knit through the back loop. So this is the same thing as knitting through the front loop. And if you remember, knitting through the back loop is also the same thing as the twisted knit stitch or the E-wrap stitch. So we're going to bring this yarn and we're going to actually go on the opposite side of our peg. So if we were doing a traditional knit stitch, we would come around like this. But because we're going to do the knitting through the back loop or a twisted knit stitch, we're going to come around the opposite side of our peg, come back, and loop around, creating a cross instead of a U shape. And then we're going to take our stitch and knit it off just like normal. And then we can continue our pattern as usual. This creates a knit one through the front loop and a knit one through the back loop. And you can kind of see them here. For larger stitches like baubles where you need to do a lot of knitting through the front and back loop in a row, you can actually do a little bit of a shortcut. So what we're going to do, I'm going to slip this over to the empty peg just like before and bring it around just like before and knit this off. But what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to drop that stitch, but I'm going to scoop up this stitch here and give myself a little bit of slack, and I'm actually going to use this and just wrap the stitches the way I want. So this would be a knit stitch or a U stitch. Then we're going to E-wrap the next one, then do another U stitch, E-wrap the next one, all the way across to however many stitches you want to do. And when I make baubles, I just I don't bother slipping these stitches underneath. I just leave them there and ignore them until I'm done with my bobble, because in one row you will go all the way out and then all the way back down. And then when you're done, so let's say I want 5 stitches in my bobble, I'll just tighten. So I have all this extra slack back here. I'm just going to tighten it up just like this. And then I can start working backwards, following the pattern in whatever way it tells you to, until I start doing my decreases. But that's just a quick way to make a knit one through the front loop, knit one through the back loop, then knit one through the front loop, through the back loop, and you can go as big or as far as you want with that, all into this same loop. Now the other version of knitting through the same loop is the alternating of purl and knit stitches into that loop. In this example, we're going to do a purl one, knit one, purl one into the same loop. So first you're going to make sure that you slide your stitches over to make room for your new stitches. So in this one we're going to have 2 new stitches, so I've slid these stitches over too. And I've already knitted over to the place in my pattern where I want to create these 2 new stitches. And this is the loop we're going to be knitting into. I find it easiest to bring this loop all the way forward instead of working backwards, but you can do whichever way works best for you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this stitch, so the first stitch we're going to do is a purl stitch. So we're going to purl it as normal. We're going to drop this down below, scoop this new stitch up. But what I'm going to do, instead of dropping this stitch, letting it fall, I'm going to grab it with my fingers, set this new stitch down, then with my tool grab that stitch I was holding with my fingers and set it onto the next empty peg. Then we're going to knit this stitch. So we're going to bring our working yarn. All of this is going behind the pins so that I don't get any snags. Bring it around. We're going to knit that one off, and then instead of dropping this loop again, we're going to simply transfer it again onto the next stitch, going behind the pin. Then we're going to just purl this one just like normal. And this time, because we're done, we're going to let that stitch fall. And then I like to just kind of pull the back. It kind of just straightens it all out. And then we have a purl one, knit one, purl one, all into this same loop.
Want more loom knitting tutorials? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow our blog at vintagestorehouse.com to get new videos and posts sent right to your inbox. Thanks for watching!